So we talk about observing things in nature, and by that observation, applying what we learned, we're able to discern truths and apply truths and keep moving forward. Along those lines, I don't know if any of you have had the experience of, and if you haven't, maybe it'll be something similar, but I've had the experience of maybe having, quite often it's a robin that will build their nest close to a back porch or somewhere where you can observe carefully day by day what goes on and during the course of a nesting season for those robins. It's kind of interesting to watch because it starts out, of course, with just some little blue eggs in a nest that's been carefully prepared. And if you ever watch a robin build a nest, they get the coarse stuff first, just like most birds do, and then as they get closer to where the actual eggs are going to be laid and the birds hatched out, they start to put finer and finer hairs and whatever they can gather that might be a little softer and more comfortable. It's kind of interesting. There's a lot of similarities that can be drawn from that to those parents, those robins raising their little birds just as parents raise their children. It happens in a lot quicker fashion, but if you really pay attention, you can learn some things. One of the things that you learn is you see how dependent the little birds are after they're hatched. They're just so frail and fragile, and you wonder how they're ever going to make it. And usually the parents will build their nest in a place where it's shady and out of the weather a little bit, hopefully out of the way from other birds that might be predators. And those little birds start eventually learning how to open their mouths when their parents come in the nest, and their parents will drop a little bit of a worm or insect or something in their mouth. And they learn that that's what it's going to take to keep them filled up and thriving and curb their hunger pains, I guess you'd say. It's not so much different in the human realm. You start with just something minor, the milk, and eventually go to the baby cereal, and then move up to, at least it's baby food to begin with, and then you move up to more like real people food, smashed up or whatever, so that it's palatable, and eventually you keep it up, you're eating hamburgers and beefsteak. Anyway, there's a progression is what I'm trying to get at. And it happens with us just like it does with baby robins in a nest, if you're able to observe carefully. It's quite interesting to me how there's patterns in nature that resemble patterns in our own life. And that's why I'm intrigued about the whole concept of transcendentalism, knowing truth innately through our observations of nature. So one of the things that you observe is that when those little birds get to a certain point, they start developing wing feathers and other feathers, and they're what used to be looked like just all mouth and belly. Pretty soon they start to look more like birds, and they start to get different kinds of feathers, and eventually they start flapping their little wings, and the feathers get longer, and you look out there one day and it looks like they might almost be ready to take off from the nest, try their first flight. Should we say their solo flight? Because they usually go one at a time when they think they're ready. And sometimes it's I've observed it's a little iffy, because they'll try to get out of the nest and try to fly, but that first flight is usually a sometimes a smash into a branch below, or sometimes even onto the ground, and even though they're trying to flap their wings and get the rhythm of things. And have you ever observed the parents in that kind of situation? The parents are honestly just beside themselves. They don't know. They're just squawking and carrying on. And if a little bird comes out of the tree too early and it's on the ground and can't get up and doesn't know how to use its feathers to elevate itself to try again, why, the parents are just down there squawking, and especially if a cat shows up in the yard somewhere, or any kind of bird that might be a predator to them. Those parents are just a bundle of nerves, I guess is the way I'd say it. And it shows by the way they carry on. And I've experienced some of those same kinds of things. I still remember my first solo drive in a car. And by the way, I'm old enough now that my kids have all grown up and driven and all that, and my grandkids, and it just still sends me over the edge when I find out, oh no, they got a driver's license and they're gonna take off, and I don't know if they can do it. And I'm just like those robins bouncing around on the ground trying to figure things out. And anyway, it's kind of interesting. I noticed that if those little birds will stay in the nest long enough and get prepared a little more, they do better. And so it's that solo flight that has to take place sooner or later. And you can ask yourself, well, whether it's driving a car or whether it's in a nest, you never know. So you just keep trying, and pretty soon the whole thing starts to get better, and you realize that life can go on. And some of those grandkids have actually been in wrecks, and my own children have been in wrecks, and it's just hard. It's kind of gut wrenching. But when I was driving, like I said, I can remember my parents being concerned, and they came out onto the old gravel road there, but when we went past our house, and they got me all ready, and I was going to go off on my own, my first solo drive, and I remember it to this day. I got in the car, started. They came around on the driver's side and gave me last minute instructions, and I started down the road, and I looked in my rear view mirror, and they were back there waving their hands back and forth, and I thought, oh no, I've done something wrong. So anyway, I stopped the car and I backed up, and they came up to me and they said, "You forgot to turn your lights on." They hadn't told me about that, and it was getting kind of dusky, and I can't remember where I was going on that drive, but I still remember them being so concerned, just like those robins are when they're baby robins get ready for their solo flight. So anyway, I started thinking, I think too much, I know, but I started thinking about when those, some of the solo experiences I've had in my life. First thing that comes to mind when I say the word solo, I think I was in second grade, so I'd been, 7 years old? Good grief. And for some reason, my mother got me into what they called back in those days the 4-H talent find. And that was sponsored by the 4-H, county 4-H program through the county agent's office, I guess. I didn't know that much about it then, but I was entered in the talent find, and my mom was the one that entered me, and I didn't know. I was like those little birds in the nest. I started thinking, what are you doing? Expect me to start flapping my wings with talent, and I don't have any, and my mother kept working with me. I'm sure just like those robins did with those little ones. Anyway, I won't tell the whole story, but It was, I remember exactly where it was held. It was held in the old Ovid Church, and that building is still standing to this day. But it was held down there, and 7 years old is all, and I sang a song solo. So we're back to solo experiences. I sang a song solo, and I'll never forget the name of the song. It was one that Doris Day made famous, and it was called Que Sera, Sera. And you'd have to look up the words to it, because I think you can still find the words, but it was all about when I grow up and do this and do that and different things. And then it would have the words Que Sera, Sera, what will be, will be. And anyway, I sang that song, and I honestly can't tell you how I did, but I must not have done too bad, because I can remember my parents commending me for it, and I got lots of pats on the back, so to speak. But that was my first solo singing experience at 7 years old. And it wasn't too long after that, bless my mother's heart, she got me into a church. It must have been about Christmas time, a Christmas program. Somehow, I don't think she could have done it later in life, because I would have revolted, but somehow she got me to sing a song on the stage, but it was out in front of the curtain while some other people were getting ready back behind. It was an intermission type thing, and I had to sing this song out in front. And all I can remember, the name, the song was Frosty the Snowman. And I had to have a broom, and I forget how I was dressed up in some sort of sheet. I guess I looked a little bit like a snowman, though it would have been a real stretch to call me a snowman. But the thing I remember about it is she taught me to do this little skip step, and it was out in front of the curtain, and it was to the whole congregation, and I had this broom, because Frosty the Snowman had a broom, and the words to the song, kind of the chorus was, thumpity thump thump thumpity thump thump, look at Frosty go. Thumpity thump thump thumpity thump thump, over the hills of snow. Anyway, I had to dance back and forth across the stage doing this little quick step that she taught me, all by myself, solo. Again, if you can imagine. And again, I don't suppose I had a stellar performance by any means, but people said I did fine. So anyway, that was an example of doing something solo. And I've thought, when I went hunting, I used to like to get out with my bow and arrow and hunt deer, though I never had much success. I had lots of success as far as getting up in the hills and being at one with nature and being real quiet and listening and waiting for deer sounds and checking tracks and wind direction and all those kinds of things. And one of the things I wasn't counting on is I hiked up into the hills for quite a ways sometimes, was that the deer didn't start coming out until it was almost dark. That's when they started to move around a bit. And you soon learned that. But one of the other things you learned is after it was too dark to shoot anything, you had to walk out. And sometimes if you didn't pay real attention to how you came in, you'd hard to find your way out. And I remember a time or two getting off the path. But even when I didn't get off the path, it was a little spooky, because you're up there in the dead of night and it's just blacker than black. Couldn't see anything. And if you happened to remember to bring a little flashlight, that was a plus. But anyway, you just go along, and pretty soon you just hear something out in the trees, and you start to imagine, oh, I wonder if that's a bear or a lion or something. And you just almost scare yourself to death thinking about what could be coming after you in the dark, and you didn't dare run. anyway, after a few of those experiences, they were kind of frightening experiences because I scared myself thinking about things. And then I started to realize, oh, holy cow, nothing happened. And if I stop thinking about it, I won't get scared. So there again, that solo exit from the forest in the middle of the night, I learned something from. And all these little solo experiences that we have, that seems to be the common thread, is that we learn. I'll never forget, I had, speaking of music and different things, I learned to play the trumpet. Again, my mother was involved, and my Aunt Opal, who was fourth grade teacher, ended up buying a horn from somebody that really knew how to play it. His name was Dan from high school. He really knew how to play it, and he got a new one. And I guess they thought if I got that same horn, I could play it like he could. Guess what? I couldn't. It wasn't quite the same at all. But I did learn how to play a few notes, and we had a good music teacher that would come down from the high school into the elementary and teach us. And when I got into high school, I still got into the high school band because I liked that teacher. And he was a real passionate guy when it came to music. And I must have done pretty well because I got to what they call first chair trumpet. There's kind of first trumpet and second trumpet that played a little different notes. And anyway, I got into the first trumpet chair, whatever that meant. Is supposed to be meaningful. But what I didn't realize is that the one that got into first trumpet chair was the guy that they came after whenever the American Legion needed somebody to play taps at the grave sites. Guess who got assigned? Me. And my band teacher would say, "Could you do that for us? They've asked us to get somebody, and you're the best one. Will you do it?" And it used to just scare me because, I mean, there's somebody that was dead, a serviceman they were burying, and sometimes I didn't even know him. Most of the time I didn't, but it was supposed to be real respectful, and those notes were supposed to be true and loud. And I'd play taps. Da, 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 da. Anyway, I'd just play the taps, and it'd ring out through the air. But since I was always just a little scared, I was always a little short of breath because of that. And but I did it all by myself, solo. And I learned that if you put fear behind you again, well, you could do it. Speaking of trumpets, I'll relate one other story where I went solo. Because our little group, they took some of the ones that they thought could do it, and they put 6 or 8 of us together, and we had what they call a dance band. Different drums and different saxophones and clarinets and flutes, whatever, and trumpets and trombones. And they had what they call a dance band, and they would go out to different people that wanted them to come. And the churches back in those days had what they called golden green balls, which were just dances for that particular church and anybody else that wanted to come. And they would have dances, and they would get dance bands. Well, they couldn't afford a real good dance band, so they tap into the high school dance band again. And guess what? There was always a floor show that they would have, and they varied from place to place. But they asked me to play the floor show music, which meant solo again. And I'll never forget, there was one that was done. The name of the song was Summer Place. And you'd have to hear the music to actually appreciate what I'm going to tell you. But that particular song, you played it on a trumpet, and the way the notes came out, it didn't give you time to breathe in between whatever you were doing. You'd play the notes, and pretty soon you'd feel like you're just going to suck dry air or something faint because you couldn't catch your breath for the sake of playing the notes. And I'll never forget how I almost got exasperated once when I was doing that, because I just thought I was going to pass out before I got through it, but I made it through it, and it was hot. I remember the sweat just rolling down my face, partly because of my anxiety, I'm sure. But there again, I went solo. Well, there's a lot of different ways that people go solo. I'll never forget, speaking of driving, our second oldest daughter was out of high school, or in her senior year, summer of her senior year, I think, and she got a job with the state parks. And she had a driver's license, and she'd even driven a little bit around our little farming community and in our little town, but she'd never, what you call, really been out on the road. She'd had driver's training too, but they didn't really get her out on the road. Well, she got this job with the state parks, and we got a call one day saying, they've just given me assignment to go to the Salt Lake Airport and pick up so-and-so. And we looked at each other, my wife and I, and we thought, holy cow, she's going to die. She's never driven that kind of traffic. And there they are sending her off to Salt Lake Airport. And what are we going to do? We should have done better. We should have taught her. But she got down there and back, and somehow she's made it and actually has become one of our better drivers. But we were like those robins in the nest when those little ones left the nest. We were, there she was on the big road, and we didn't. We were just beside ourselves, wondering how she was going to pull that off. But she did. So there's a lot of times when I think about those kinds of experiences. The one that I think of quite often is related to my scouting experience. I can remember going up to, it was in the process of getting a camping merit badge. You had to camp out so many nights, and you could do some of them in your backyard. But the whole design of the Boy Scout program was to make you grow up and be a man instead of a boy. And so they got to where you had to have so many campouts out in the wild, not just in your backyard in a tent. It wasn't the same. And I soon realized that. But so we had to, I remember, it's actually my scoutmaster's property, but it was clear kind of in the hills and up the foothills and up in a grove of trees and quite a ways away from any structures or houses or anything. I went up there and got all set up. My parents helped me set up my tent and get ready, and I was supposed to meet a friend up there who was also getting the merit badge with me, but he didn't show up. And my parents waited and waited, and I waited, and he still didn't show up. And I finally told him, I said, I can do this on my own. So go ahead and go home. I'll take care of it. And I did. I stayed the night, and it turned out to be just fine. I proved it to myself. And my parents talked about it afterwards, how they were pretty amazed that I was able to, or even willing to stay there alone. Now, it turns out my friend actually did come a little later, but I was willing to stay there alone and get it done. So anyway, there's times when we go solo, and it's not a bad thing. You can learn from it. You can do things that you didn't think you could do. And so as we go through this, I want you to realize that just because something's hard or it's difficult, you learn from it, and you get better as time goes on, and you realize that you really can do things you didn't think you could do. And the common denominator behind it all is when you get done, you've accomplished something that proved it to yourself that it was possible. So I hope you'll keep a positive outlook on anytime you find yourself in a situation or have to make a decision where you need to go solo, because You can do it. I did it, and so can you. Have confidence and realize that it's for your betterment. You can't always stay under someone else's wing. You have to experience things on your own. And that's an important truth to understand. So just like those little robins getting out of the nest, we all have to get out of the nest sooner or later. And even if we're out of the nest, there's things that we're still in the nest with as far as our own personal habits and kinds of things that we cling to when we really know we should move on and do better and use our wings, so to speak. Good night.